the Holy Gospel as it is recorded in Matthew. Later that day, Jesus left the house and sat down by the lake shore. Such great crowds gathered that he went and took a seat in a boat while the crowd stood along the shore. He addressed them at length in parables, saying, "One day a farmer went out sowing seed. Some of the seed landed on a footpath where birds came and ate it up. Some of the seed fell on rocky ground where there was some dirt, but when the sun rose and scorched it, it withered away for lack of roots. And some of the seed fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked it. And some of it landed on good soil and yielded a crop 30, 60, even 100 times what was sown. Let those who have ears to hear this." Jesus also said, "Now listen to the parable of the sower. When people hear the message about the kingdom of God without understanding it, the evil one comes along and snatches away what is sown in their hearts. This is the seed sown along the path. Those who receive the seed that fell on rocky ground are the ones who hear the word and at first welcome it with joy. But they have no roots, so they last only for a while. When some setback or persecution comes because of the message, they quickly fall away. Those who receive the message that fell among the thorns are the ones who hear the word, but then worldly anxieties and the lure of wealth choke it off, and the message produces no fruit. But those who receive the seed that fell on rich soil are those who hear the message and understand it. They produce a crop that yields 100 or 60 or 30 times what was sown." This is the gospel of Christ. Jesus of Nazareth was an obscure, poor, brown Jewish rabbi living in an oppressed part of the Roman Empire, whose death continues to impact the world. Jesus' death upon the empire's instrument of execution was relatively unremarkable. Thousands of unruly inhabitants of the empire were executed during Jesus' lifetime by those charged with the task of establishing and maintaining order by force. To the powers that be, Jesus' execution was little more than the routine death of a homeless outcast who spent far too much time creating social unrest. Nothing more than the insignificant death of a troublemaker without influence in the halls of power who would or could not moderate his own behavior. An insignificant troublemaker dies under the rule of law, and yet the impact continues to reverberate all around the world nearly 2,000 years after it should have been long forgotten. Last fall, nobody's really sure exactly when or to whom it happened, but sometime last fall, a person so obscure that history will fail to name them, someone living in an empire where order is maintained by force, got sick and died. The impact of that death has kept millions of us all around the world locked up inside of our homes, avoiding tiny droplets whose impact on any one of us could be catastrophic. For months now, I have heard various people, including myself, refer to the strange times in which we are living as chaotic. The very word chaos summons in me visions of Genesis, when the Ruach, the breath of the Creator, hovered over what in Hebrew is called the tohu bohu, the formless void, or the chaos. The Ruach hovers over the tohu bohu and calls forth life out of the chaos. I can't help wondering what it will take to bring forth light out of the chaos which continues to swirl around us. When the impact of apparently insignificant events can create waves which reverberate throughout creation in an endless whirl and swirl capable of sweeping us off our collective feet and setting us adrift on stormy seas, where or how can we find moorings to set us aright? It makes sense for us to look to science as a way of knowing so that we might chart a course to solid ground. So my mind jumps to what little science I have, and it is just a little science. I must confess that I dropped out of physics before the Christmas exam so as not to fail altogether. I am but a humble wordsmith. So clutching my visions of chaos, let me cross into unfamiliar scientific territory to explore the contours of what physicists call chaos theory. I say contours of chaos theory because I am, after all, but a humble wordsmith, and it sounds appealing. But it would be more accurate to say, let me examine a small, ever so small droplet of chaos theory. The term chaos theory was coined back in the 1960s by a mathematician named Edward Lorenz, who worked at MIT as a meteorologist. Lorenz was trying to use complicated mathematical formulas to develop models so that he could predict weather patterns and weather systems. During the course of his research, what seemed like an insignificant, tiny little input into the computer decision revealed the impact of unintended consequences. Lorenz had made a decision about rounding off a number. The number was 0.506127, and Lorenz rounded that off to 0.506, assuming that the difference of 0.000127 was so insignificant that its impact would be inconsequential. Lorenz turned out to be wrong. What appeared to be a tiny inconsequential number turned out to have a significant impact. That tiny number, somewhere in the mere millions of a difference in barometric pressure, capable of only an infinitesimal impact on wind speed, no bigger than a baby's sneeze or the beat of a butterfly's wings, that tiny change at the beginning of the weather system turned out to be a difference between a blue sky and a monsoon. Lorenz coined the phrase butterfly effect to describe this phenomenon. Today, quantum physicists use the butterfly effect to describe what happens when a small change in one place in a system can result in a ginormous difference in a later state. The mere flapping of a butterfly wing has the ripple effect which multiplies over time and changes weather patterns thousands of miles away. The unintended consequences of our actions are almost unfathomable. When George Floyd lay dying beneath the knee of a police officer, steeped in the supremacy myths of Western empires, Floyd called out for his mama. And a world in lockdown rose up and risked the dangers of marching in the streets during a global pandemic. Mothers and nurturers in cities and towns all over the planet responded to one more death in a long line of forgettable deaths of obscure people who just happened to be Black or Indigenous or people of color. Suddenly, collective chants of Black Lives Matter and Indigenous Lives Matter rang out across this planet, and once again, the forces of empire resort to calls for law and order. Somehow, the randomness of events coming together makes life seem just that, random. And we are left hovering over the tohu bohu, the formless void, the chaos, longing for a creative power stronger than our puny empires to call forth light from the darkness. Fortunately, not all darkness is terrifying. After all, We humans gestate in darkness. New life begins in darkness, whether life is cocooned in the waters of the womb or planted in the darkness of the earth. The seeds of life require darkness to thrive. Aha! I bet you were wondering when I'd get to the sower from our gospel reading. Well, let's look at this sower. For most of my life, I have read this parable and said, aha, finally a parable without a hidden meaning, a parable that I can understand. But that was back when I believed that God, you know, the grand puppeteer in the sky, the God who is in charge of everything, the God who was up there manipulating everything, the God who I have long since given up in favor of the divine mystery which lives at the very heart of reality, the mystery which is the love that we call God. Believing that we live and move and have our being in the mystery who lives and breathes in, with, through, and beyond us means that I have to dig a little deeper than my image of the guy up there, that other God that I used to believe in. I must move beyond this image to find the hidden seeds sowed by a sower who lives and breathes in, with, through, and beyond us. You see, there is more to chaos theory than the randomness of the butterfly effect. The God of my past, let's call him, and I do mean him, let's call him the sky God that I used to believe in, withers into absurdity when cast in the role of first and final cause, a supreme universal agent of some sort, first imagining and then designing all the outcomes in the universe. As theologian Robin Myers insists in his book, Saving God from Religion, it is comforting to believe that we exist because God intended that we should exist. It means we are here in our present form because, as the poetry of Genesis asserts, humans are the final consummate project of a creator who had us in mind all along. Chaos theory, Myers writes, suggests that we are one-time, non-repeatable, fantastic, but essentially meaningless occurrences. Go back and introduce even the smallest variable, say a primate virus, at just the right moment, and your Aunt Martha would not exist, nor would you, nor would anyone else you love. Except that isn't exactly what chaos theory says. It is paradoxically named because Lorenz believed that results that appear chaotic may in fact be ordered at the outer limits of some mysterious boundary. You never get the same results twice, but there's also a kind of phenomenological edge beyond which those final results never go. Lorenz mapped this boundary and called it a strange attractor. When he looked at his graphs, Lorenz realized that although the weather patterns never repeated themselves, they all traced a pattern that was undeniable, a self-imposed elegance that kept what appeared to be chaotic from flying off the page. Some people have compared this boundary, this strange attractor, to God. The mystery, which is the love, which some of us call God, is a strange attractor indeed, living and breathing in, with, through, and beyond us, sowing seeds of new life into the blessed darkness, ever creating more and more glorious ways of being in the world. Even the tiniest of seeds are capable of giving birth to the most awesome creations. An obscure, poor, brown Jewish rabbi living in an oppressed part of a totalitarian empire, his life and death, they continue to impact the world. Your life, my life, our lives. There are all sorts of possibilities. Random, perhaps, unintended consequences, almost certainly, but also splendid opportunities. You see, you are all wonderfully made, endowed with the capacity to choose, which means that in addition to circumstances beyond our control, there are also circumstances within our control. Each and every one of us can choose to perpetuate random acts of kindness, outrageous outpourings of generosity, ridiculous displays of hospitality, dangerous demonstrations of courage, along with extravagant acts of love. What does love look like in these strange and chaotic times? Love looks like you. You, speaking out when you hear of injustice. You, listening with a fierce passion to someone who desperately needs to be heard. You, standing in solidarity with the poor or the oppressed. You, marching in the streets for change, or you tenderly touching the shoulder of someone who is lost. Or you feeding the hungry, giving a cold glass of water, or welcoming a stranger. You daring to move beyond your comfort zones. You laughing out loud in the face of ignorance. You wearing a mask. You holding your lover. Or you kneeling in prayer. Or you refusing to give up. Or you daring to hope. Or you dreaming new dreams. That's what love looks like here and now. The divine one in the flesh. Love is you and I working together with all the many embodiments of love to live into the dream of the kingdom. It may appear to all the world that your one precious life is insignificant, hardly worth mentioning in the grand scheme of things. Then suddenly, like the flapping of a butterfly's wings, your random action begins a journey we know not where. Myers insists that to choose is life's most powerful, most spiritual, most godlike activity. Friends, we are indeed living in strange and chaotic times. There are forces out there who would have us resort to restoring order so that we can return to what is familiar. We could simply just choose to plant the same old seeds. There's something appealing about the powers of empire. Better the evil we know than the evils we do not know. Or we could do something different. We could put our faith in the strange attractor and trust in the elegance of creation to ensure that we do not fly off into oblivion. For this strange attractor holds our existence in a miraculous web of tiny occurrences which have the power beyond our wildest imaginations to grow new possibilities. So let us choose to plant seeds of kindness, generosity, hospitality, and courage, so that the love, which is the mystery we call God, can live and move and have being in, with, through, and beyond us. Let us be the creators we were created to be. For we were created out of the tohu bohu, out of the chaos, and we are held in the love by this strange attractor, which is the mystery that gives us the audacity so that we can choose what seeds we shall plant. Let us be random, outrageous, ridiculous, dangerous, extravagant sowers of seeds of kindness, generosity, hospitality, and courage. Let us be love in the world, love which is beyond the beyond and beyond that also. Amen.